Let's review Pesachim, Daf Details. The Gemara starts with telling us that the Geula is called, according to Yaakov Avinu, it says V'nala el Har Hashem el Beis Elokei Yaakov. That's because Yaakov referred to the Makam HaMikdash as a bayis, which has permanence, versus Avram and Yitzchak, who referred to it as Har and Soda, respectively, referring to the Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni, which were Chorev. Bayis represents a permanence, which will be the Bayis Shlishi, Lasad Lavai. The Gemara then tells us that the day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be Mekabetz to Goliyos will be as great as the day that the Rebbeinu Shalom created Shemayim V'Aretz. The Gemara gets back to the Lamdas of the Mishnah. Yosim, who two apotropsim included him in their karbanos, the Yosim could eat neither place. Once again, the Gemara asked that would be Brera. So the Gemara says that it says Sela Bayis, which means that Katan, his father, could register him on the carbon, even Bal Korchai, and an apotropos is going to be responsible for the chinuch of this Yosim, this Katan, and therefore they could be Mamana, the Yosim on the carbon, even without the Yosim's knowledge or agreement, and therefore it wouldn't come on to Brera. The Gemara then brings a brisa that says that someone who I'm responsible for, like B'nai Hakatan or Eved and the Shivcha Kanainis, there I could register them on a carbon Bal Karchan. But B'nai Ubita Gedolim and an Eved V'amevriya or a wife, there you could only register them on a carbon with their agreement. The Gemara says, Stama, you assume that they'll agree unless they either verbally protest or if they actually shech their own carbon. That act clearly shows that they don't want to be included in the carbon of their adon or of their husband. The Gemara then discusses an Eved of two Shutfim. Our Mishnah says that Eved cannot be included in either carbon of either one of its two masters, although the Brisa says that he can eat from whichever one he wants. The Gemara says that our Mishnah is speaking where each Adon did not want to get any benefit from the other Adon, and therefore he wanted the entire Eved to be Mamuna on his carbon, even the part of the Eved that belongs to a Shudav, and vice versa. And therefore this Eved cannot eat from either carbon. The brisa that says the Eved can eat from whichever one he wants is when each of the Adons are not makbid on each other, and they don't mind if their Eved will eat from the other one's carbon, and therefore the Eved can eat from either carbon. The Gemara then asks that a person who's half an Eved, half an Chayrin, it says that he can't eat from his Adon's carbon, but it's mashma could eat from his carbon. The question is, how is that possible? He's still a half an Eved. The Gemara says it's referring to the Mishnah Achrona. There was a question between Bishamai and Basilil, someone who was freed by one of his masters. Now he cannot marry a Bascharin because of his Tzad Avdos, and he can't marry a Shivcha because of his Tzad Cherus. And the Torah says one must get married, one must be engaged in Pru. And therefore you force the Adon remaining to free the Eved, and then the Eved will have to pay back his value. So based on that, surely the Eved will be able to bring his own carbon because he becomes a Ben Chayrin. So according to the Mishnah Achrona, automatically we make the remaining Adon free the Eved, and therefore the Eved will be able to bring his own carbon Pesach. The Mishnah tells us that if someone told his servant, go prepare for me a carbon Pesach and shech for me a carbon Pesach, it doesn't matter if it was a Gedi or if it was a Tleh, either way, it's going to be a good carbon. The Gemara tells us even if the owner would have normally preferred a Tleh and you did a Gedi or vice versa, you're accepting whatever your Eved did for you. If the Eved shechted both, then you eat from the first one. The Gemara asks, why isn't that a problem of Brera? You can't be Nimna on two carbonas at the same time. The Gemara says it's speaking by a Melech and a Malka who don't really care at all if it's a Gdi or a Tleh, and therefore automatically it's the first carbon that they're in the Nismana on, and the second one ends up being puzzled. The Mishnah tells us as well that if the Eved forgot which one the Adon wanted, Tle or Gdi, what we say is that the Eved will make a Tanai. I'm checking them both. The one that my Adon wants will be the one that's for the Adon, and the one that the Adon doesn't want will be my Korban Pesach. And once he goes back and the Adon tells him which one he wanted, everything becomes clarified. The Gemara asks, how is it possible that he could have his own korban if Masha Kana Eved Kana Ha'adon? The Gemara says that this would only be possible if the Eved purchased a korbanos by someone who wanted to make sure that this system would work. And therefore, when he would be makne the Eved's korban to the Eved, it would be Almanah She'en L'Rabach Reshusba, and therefore the Eved would be able to have his own korban. The Mishnah then tells us that if both the Adon as well as the Eved forgot which one was for who, then both of these korbanos cannot be eaten, because we don't know which one they're allowed to eat, although they're both kosher. And since they're both kosher, they will not have to bring a Pesach Sheni. The Gemara tells us that this only works if this mix-up was after the Zrika. But if this happened before the Zrika, then neither korban had oichlin at the time of the Zrika, and therefore they'd be possible. The Gemara brought a similar case with 5 people who brought their korbanos Pesach, and when they each got their hide, they noticed that one of them had a yabelos, which would indicate that the animal was a mum, meaning one of these 5 people were not yoytze, the mitzvah of the korban Pesach. The Gemara tells us as well there that if they were mixed up already before the Zrika, then they'll all have to bring a different korban Pesach. But if they only got mixed up after the Zrika, then they don't bring another korban Pesach. The Gemara asked, what about the one fellow who it turns out that his korban is puzzle, he's not going to be yaitze? The Gemara says, Einechanami, but we don't have an option for him. He can't bring another korban, because who's going to bring another korban? You don't know if you're the one who already brought the korban. The Gemara suggests maybe each of them should chip in to one more korban and say, if I'm the one who has the mum, this korban will be for me. The Gemara says you can't do that, because they already were memuna on their earlier korbanos, the ones that were ksherim, so they wouldn't be able to have any part in that korban at all. The Gemara then suggests maybe each person should bring another korban with their korban Pesach, and say that if my first korban was kosher, then this is a shlomim. If my first korban was postel, this should be my Pesach. The Gemara says you couldn't do that, because if it was a shlomim, the chazav shoik would have to go to the kohen. But if the kohen wasn't memuna on this korban, then the kohen wouldn't be able to eat that chazav shoik. The Gemara also tells us that this concept that the melech and the malka is not makbid, we saw that by Rabbi Gamliel. There was such a story with the melech was asked, and he didn't care. He referred it to the malka, and the malka referred it to Rabbi Gamliel. In fact, there was a case where they found a dead sheretz in the food, and the question was a tamei. The melech deferred the question to the malka deferred the question to Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel suggested that they immersed this sheretz in cold water, and it started to move, which indicated that it was alive, and therefore there was no tumah. So in fact, Rabbi Gamliel was the posek for the melech and malka as well.